Hey everyone, Till here. Today I'm reviewing the UPerfect UColor O2 touchscreen OLED portable display. First of all, a disclaimer, this is a review unit provided by the company, and in this video I'll just present to you my findings so that you can decide whether this is worth the money. And the first thing I want to say is the touchscreen does not work that well with macOS. Earlier it was working, now it's not. The price of this display at the time of review is US $400. Now there is actually another model called UColor O, and the price is US $620. The price of this display is $329 US on Amazon, and for Black Friday they have this at $279. So this is a very attractive price. By the way, do me a favor. If you have the intention to buy this display, consider using the affiliate links that I have for you in the video description below. And if you're buying direct from UPerfect's online store, I have a $50 coupon code for you in the video description. The list of differences between these two models can be found on UPerfect's website, which I will link to in the video description below. By the way, UPerfect does not list the OLED displays on the menu, so the best way to look for them is to use the search box, type in OLED. So now let me give you the bottom line up front. Now these two displays are both OLED touchscreen displays. Personally for me, I will go with the O2 model, which is almost $200 cheaper. And the resolution is lower. It's 2880 by 1800. But on this 15.6-inch display, the visuals still look sharp enough. And I like the 16:10 aspect ratio, which is a huge selling point for me. For the other model, the O model, it's 4K UHD resolution. Aspect ratio is 16:9. Okay, the touchscreen worked for a split second there, but now it's no longer working on macOS. Touchscreen works fine with Windows. The refresh rate of O2, this display is 120 Hz. For the 4K display, it's 60 Hz. So that's another selling point for this more affordable, relatively speaking, model. And the brightness for this is 500 nits. So the real world brightness is about 400 nits, which is about 20% lower. And I've measured the brightness, so it's around 400 nits. The brightness for the 4K display is 400 nits, so the real world brightness is about 300 nits. Anyway, 300 nits is more than sufficient because currently I'm using the display at 230 nits. And if you need a built-in battery, the 4K display does have a built-in battery, but based on my experience, the built-in battery will run out quite quickly because these displays, they do use quite a lot of power. Visual quality of this OLED display is really good. I measured color support for 100% sRGB, 100% P3, 94% AdobeRGB, and a maximum brightness of 334 nits. And as mentioned earlier, the refresh rate is 120 Hz, so when you have any sort of animation movement on this display, it looks really smooth. If you look really close, you can see pixelation, but from 1 arm's distance away, the visuals look sharp. This display supports USB-C video connection and HDMI, and the input source will be automatically detected depending on which cable you connect. Downsides, depending on the computer you are using, it may or may not be possible to use one single USB-C video cable for video, power, and data. So here I am using 2 cables because I have to connect this to additional power. Now, even if you can use a single cable connection, you are not going to drive this display at maximum brightness, and hence you will not be able to get the best visual quality. The second downside is OLED displays will have pulse wave modulation, and I have adjusted my camera settings to show you the flickering. Alright, I've just adjusted the camera settings to remove the PWM so that it's not that distracting. So people with sensitive eyes may be affected by PWM, and if you are not sure whether your eyes are sensitive to pulse wave modulation, I recommend you go to an electronics shop and look at laptops or displays or TVs with OLED and see whether you get any eye fatigue or dizziness or some other effects. Third downside, the touch screen does not work well with macOS, and this size and resolution combo also does not work well with macOS and can cause slight fuzziness to the visual quality. But there is a workaround which I will talk about later. So that's the bottom line. And now let's take a look at the items included with the purchase. These are the items in the box. There is the user guide that will show you the various video connection possible with the display, and this is the display inside the flip cover. This is a 33-watt charger with interchangeable plugs, and you can choose the plug on the ordering page. There are 4 screws for the VESA mount on the display, and there are 4 cables. There are 2 USB-C to USB-C video cables. This is a mini HDMI to full-size HDMI cable, and this is a USB-C to USB-A cable, and the cables are 1 meter long each. This flip cover is made with PU leather, and it's quite thin, but it provides, I would say, decent protection for the front and back of the display. I have other cases similar to this, and after months of usage, the edges will fray, so just take note of that. To prop up the display, you just put the bottom here at the first slot, and you can fold this back, and this will snap with magnets, and sometimes I just use it like this. Let's look at the design of this display, which is very thin, and the weight is 720 grams, so this is very portable, very lightweight. The surface is very glossy, and there is no anti-reflective coating, so if you are using this display in an environment with lots of reflections, it can be problematic. Let's look at the back. There is a VESA mount behind, and this is 7.5 by 7.5 centimeters, and the back is made with aluminum. It's matte textured, so the build quality is quite solid, and this can attract fingerprints quite easily. It may not be obvious, but there are actually 2 speakers on the back, and they are not that loud and they sound hollow, and since they are facing the back, the audio quality is not good. That's the power light indicator, power button, OSD manual button, up, down for navigation and exit. On the other side, we have this mini HDMI, 2 USB-C video ports which are interchangeable. So you can use one for video and the other one for power, or you can switch around. Let's talk about video connection. So this display supports either HDMI or USB-C video connection. If you use HDMI, you will need to connect the display to power source. So there will be 2 cables here, HDMI and USB-C to power. If you want to use HDMI, you definitely need to connect this display to power. So you need 2 cables, and touch screen will not work. So if you want to use touch screen as well, you have to connect another cable to your computer. So we are looking at a 3 cable connection. If you use USB-C video connection, it is possible to power this display with just one single USB-C cable, which is what I have here. One issue with this single USB-C video cable connection is it may not drive the display at maximum brightness. So if you try to increase the brightness beyond certain percentage, the screen may black out. And once the screen blacks out, it may not come back on. And if it doesn't come back on, you will have to connect an additional cable. So right now, it actually works fine with a single USB-C cable, and the brightness is at 50%, which is bright enough for me. I've measured this at 50%, it's 200 nits. For my environment, I usually use my displays at 150 to 200 nits. if it's even brighter, maybe I will go up to 250 nits. So 200 nits for me with this display is very satisfactory. If one single USB-C cable cannot power this display at a decent level of brightness, the visual quality of the OLED display may be affected, and if so, you have to connect the display to additional power to get the best visual quality. So right now at 50%, the visual quality actually looks pretty good to me because thankfully this Windows laptop is able to provide enough power. With the display connected, make sure to check the resolution and refresh rate. So now it's running at 100 Hz, which is not the maximum, 120 Hz. So let me just go into Windows settings here to switch from 100 to 120 Hz. Keep the change and notice the brightness actually went lower. So now let me just increase the brightness again. So now it's 120 Hz. Let's see what happens when we disconnect and connect the display again. So it should be able to remember the settings. Okay, so this is another downside for this display. Now it doesn't have enough power. Imagine you are working at home and you're using a single cable connection and it works fine, and then you bring this outdoors and you try to connect and it doesn't work for some reason. So that's where you need to attach the display to additional power. You can attach this to a power bank as long as the power bank can provide at least 30 watts of power, which is what that included charger is providing right now to this display. I have just increased the brightness to 50% again, so let me disconnect and connect again just to see whether the display can remember the settings, because believe it or not all portable displays will remember the settings, and thankfully it went back to 50%, so that's great. One nice thing I discovered about macOS is if you have the cursor on this display, you can actually use the buttons to control the brightness where the cursor is, and when the cursor is here, you can control the brightness here. For Windows, when I adjust the brightness, it will show the brightness bar here, but it would actually adjust the brightness for this display. If you connect a Mac to this display with HDMI, the refresh rate is limited to 100 Hz. And this is the resolution and refresh rate you can get with Windows with HDMI connection. If you're using macOS, note that this 2880 1800 resolution on a 15.6-inch display is actually not a good combo for macOS. macOS will have some problem with UI scaling, so the text that you see here is going to look slightly fuzzy. So you actually need to install another app called Better Display and enable this high resolution or high DPI mode. And notice the difference once I enable this. Notice the text on the left side, actually the text on the whole screen is now sharper. Let me disable this. Notice the extra fuzziness. Let me enable this. Notice the text is now sharper. So if you want to use this display with macOS, you have to get this app called Better Display. I believe there is a freemium version as well as a paid version, and this app to me is really worth the money. Let's talk about the visual quality of this OLED display. The contrast ratio is 1 to 1 million, so you can get very bright highlights and deep blacks. I measured maximum brightness up to 400 nits at the edges, 384 in the center. The balance or the evenness of the brightness and the colors to me looks very even. So at 400 nits brightness, you can definitely get true HDR effect with this OLED display. The visuals look really stunning. And color accuracy is pretty good. 100% sRGB and P3, 94% AdobeRGB. So if you are thinking of getting this for editing photos, creating artworks, this is a relatively color accurate display. The resolution is 2880 by 1800, so the aspect ratio is 16 by 10, which is to me a huge selling point. Nowadays, when I look at portable displays or laptops, if I see 16 by 9, I just discard that option. 16 by 10 is the minimal aspect ratio I would go with. 3 by 2 is even better. So as mentioned earlier during the bottom line, this is an OLED display, so people with sensitive eyes may be affected by pulse wave modulation. I personally cannot see pulse wave modulation and my eyes are not affected by this, so this looks fine to me. When playing HDR videos, the HDR looks really good. The lights really look like they are glowing, and if you have LCD and OLED side by side to compare, you will definitely see the extra contrast with an OLED display. The resolution of 2080 by 1800 is pretty sharp from 1 arm's distance away. The advantage of a 16 by 10 aspect ratio is, given the fixed width of the display, you will get more vertical space. You essentially get more pixels. So in this case, you can just show the taskbar or the dock and you don't have to hide it, and you also get more space for work, more pixels for work. Next, let's see what you can change with the OSD. There is brightness, contrast, eco mode, dynamic contrast ratio, sharpness. So you can use the buttons by the side to navigate up and down, enter and exit. Here you can change the aspect ratio, black level hue, saturation. You can probably leave all these settings as default. So with my color calibration, I actually left all the settings as default and managed to color calibrate it to high degree of color accuracy. So you can just leave those as default. All right, to conclude, this display has many positives and some negatives or limitations, but nothing too major. Thanks for watching. See you guys again. Bye.